Our interview with Hai Do extends over 2 episodes. The first focuses on his family's escape from Vietnam when Saigon fell. The second reveals how that experience shaped and enabled the rest of his remarkable life here in the United States and abroad. Welcome to We and Lewis, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the remarkable, creative, and energetic people who live in Lewis and are helping our community forge a collective soul as appealing as it is unique. These are their stories and their words. They are the We in Lewis. I'm Kevin McGinnis. Our guest today is Hai Do, whose life has been as remarkable as it is inspiring. Fleeing Saigon with his parents and siblings when the city fell to the North Vietnamese army, they escaped by boat and eventually ended up in the United States. With the courage and work ethic often found in so many immigrants to this country, he overcame language and cultural barriers to become a journalist and photographer with United Press International, a photographer with Agence France Presse, was the assistant managing editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and currently is the chief of the Learning English division of Voice of America. Hai's photographed and written about every conceivable walk of life, from people, refugees, politicians, and major news stories around the world, as well as most major U.S. sporting events, including Super Bowls, World Series, an NCAA Final Four, and an Olympics. Our sponsors today are the sister restaurants Kindle and Half Full. Located in downtown Lewis, Kindle offers seasonal American fare with a French influence, an amazing selection of wines by the glass, and an atmosphere that makes anyone feel they're not just welcome, but a regular. Right next door, Half Full doles out exquisite gourmet pizzas and wine, which we all know are the 2 most important adult food groups. And keep an eye out for their weekly specials. They really are amazing. Hi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much for the nice introductions. I just want to mention that, you gave me a lot of high praise. I just want to mention that my story is actually the story of 500,000 Vietnamese who escaped at the end of the Vietnam War. And it is possibly a story of most immigrants, from the day that people came over to establish this country with the original 13 colony. It's also the story of the millions of refugees that came over after World War II and literally after every war and conflict, and there's still quite a few that's still beating a path to this country, and it is their story. It's not, my story is pretty much a reflection of all of our stories.
Well, on that note, let's go back to the night of April 30th, 1975. Tell us what was happening around you.
It's the day that possibly will be something that I'll remember forever. My father was a major in the South Vietnamese army, and we came from North Vietnam, and we left the North, and our family left the North and moved to the South. And my father became an officer in the South Vietnamese army and fought against the North. So when the North Vietnamese troop was moving into the city that day, we really had no choice. My father possibly would have been arrested and imprisoned, and our family would possibly be sent to different places in re-education camp or farming or industry or everywhere else except living the life that we used to. So we had no choice but to leave. We didn't have any other means to leave. People who's well-connected has left on airplane by different means. They bought their way out. We just sort of, that day, as the communists was entering the perimeter of the city of Saigon, we were running away because the shelling and the gunfire was coming very close to our house. So we were just bidding a path toward the central part of Saigon, toward the center city. And we wandering everywhere. one of the thought, my father thought that maybe we can see if we can get to the American embassy. Hopefully, they would, help bring us out of the country. We came still a few blocks away from the embassy, and in front of me, there was thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the street, and we couldn't even see the gate to the embassy. We couldn't even get anywhere close to a block of the embassy. And every other person that you see there was carrying a gun with them on top of that. So my father said, well, maybe we should move somewhere else. And so we went to the naval base in called Bạch Đằng Naval Base. It's right on the Saigon River. So when we went there, we didn't see anybody at all. So we thought that, this would be see if we can find our way into one of the Navy vessels to, if they can help us to leave the city. As we're trying to cross the street, all of a sudden people were shooting on top of our head. It turned out to be the naval people, the Navy, the South Vietnamese Navy themselves was shooting across, trying to keep people away from the naval base because they were protecting their own ways to get out of the city. And so we start walking our way along Saigon River and went further and further, and we found a couple of the vessels, were still around the port of Saigon at the time. So my father and our family, we had 6 children, my parents and my grandmother. We just sort of forced our way onto that boat, and there were many more people. There are thousands of people around there trying to do the same way. I'm not a very big person, but compared with most Vietnamese, I'm possibly one of the bigger one. And my father is considered to be a fairly big guy, even if he's only like 5'8" or 5'9". But in Vietnamese standard, that's pretty big. So he pushed his way, and we pushed our way onto the boat. And we finally went aboard these small vessels. We had no idea where it's going. We had no idea what it is. But there was hundreds and maybe thousands of people boarded this boat at the time, and there was just wall-to-wall people. So it turned out to be that once we got on board these vessels, we realized that they were a group of people was paying and organize a trip trying to leave. And literally, as we're trying to board and get onto the boat, they are trying to leave the port of Saigon at the same time. So you have people who jump into the river and trying to swim after the boat, and there's people who are stuck behind. They will start pulling their guns out and start aiming at the vessel. So you have people who got stuck behind, waving their guns and start shooting in the air and trying to get the boat's attentions, and people on the boat pulling out their own gun and shooting back. And so, this whole thing was going on. I'm looking at this and I say, God, what else could it be? And then right in front of us, there was like a huge explosion. And I had no idea what it was. But afterward, we found out it was like the oil reserve tank exploded. At the same time, when all these things is going on, you have helicopters flying in and out, and you have like small jets flying above it. There was bombs, there was explosion, there was fire burnings everywhere. And I'm just looking around. And that's one thing that I sort of want to mention. It's a sort of image that lasts in my mind for a long, long time. As the boat was pulling away from its berth in the port of Saigon, I just see back in there, because you're sort of getting far away. I just see like these people with their eyes is sunken in eye, and they just look at me. Like all I see was just one set of eyes after another, just like staring at you. And I sort of felt like these are people who's desperate. They look at you, longing to be on, to trade place with me, to be on the boat where I'm in as the boat is pulling away. And the reason why that image is stuck with me, because after I left Vietnam, after I came to this country, for a good 10 years when I lived in the U.S., every night I woke up in the middle of the night and I'm breaking out in sweat. And every night I had this sort of nightmare that when I'm looking at these eyes in the port of Saigon, one of them was myself, was my own eye. I just realized I'm one of the person who got stuck. And I broke out in sweat and woke up and I realized, no, I'm here safely, situation in this country. But that kind of nightmare lasts for a long, long time. It lasts for a good 10 years. And it slowly went away. And as I'm looking back, when the nightmare went away is also when I become more assimilated, more integrated in American society.
Did you feel in some ways guilt for getting out?
I think that was part of it. My first 10 years, half of myself is back in Vietnam and half of myself in this country. And that's why those images keep on coming out. And like I said, I'll always wake up with I was one of those eyes that was staring at the people on the boat.
When you left that day, when you ran that day, you didn't carry, were you carrying a lot of stuff?
We had nothing.
Yeah.
We had nothing on it. Yeah. We literally just ran for our lives that day.
Now, when you got on the boat, you didn't know this boat was going to be an option. Did you have food? Did you have the wherewithal to sustain a journey wherever this boat was going?
When we got on the boat, we had no idea where it was going. And actually, they had no idea where they were going either. As I mentioned, it's a cargo vessels that was using to move goods up and down the river. And this is the first time they went into the high sea. It's not that big of a boat. And so they went to the high sea for the first time. So from what my understanding, they were zigzagging out in the sea because they had no idea which way they were navigating. We had no food at all on the boat because we literally just left, trying to force our way into the boat. And when the boat was zigzagging in the South China Sea, trying to figure out which way it's heading to, we just kind of float along, and we had no food. We had hardly any water at the time. And there's a couple of things I remember was that as I'm getting very hungry, I noticed there was a bag of flour that was tucked away in one of the corner in the front of the boat. So when I saw that bag of flour, it just occurred to me, okay, if I'm mixing flours with seawater, if I throw a can over, get some seawater and mix it with flour, and there's an oven, I think, in the boat, and if I stick it in there, it's got to be bread, right? So I kind of just did exactly like that. I just got some flour and I mix it with seawater and I roll it up to like a loaf of French bread, or what I think is a loaf of French bread. And then I talked to the boat owner. I said, can you just bake it in the oven to see if we can get some food? He said, sure. So he put it in there and it came out. By the time it came out, the entire outside of the so-called loaf of bread was kind of dark, like charcoal. So I just break it off and I took a bite and I realized inside was just clump of white powder. And I said, oh God, I couldn't even take a bite. And, up until then I thought that's how you make bread. So anyway, we had no food. We had a little bit of water. I remember we have I have a sister who is about, I would say maybe roughly 11, 12 months old. And I saw my dad just carry my sister. Her name is Zim. He just carries Zim into a different part of the boat. He asked people, he begged with them. So they gave him a container with a little bit of water in there. So he bring the water back and he would just touch his finger in there and he would just dip his finger into the container of water and put it into her mouth. Just a little bit of a time, just trying to keep her hydrated. And then, so there's maybe a few drops of water left and we all kind of just touch a sip here and there, just to sustain us. At one point, I think my parents was talking about my sister's just not going to make it. and they were talking about the possibility that they might have to find a board, a wooden board somewhere, wrap her body, and just float it away. That was the last time I heard they said something like that, and I passed out because I had no idea how many days it was, but we're talking about several days now when the boat would just zigzag in the sea. I had nothing to eat, and I might have a few drops of water here and there, and I just passed out, and I didn't remember how long it was. Afterward, my mom said that it was 7 days, and the reason why she remembered 7 days was because by the time we left, until an American warship found our boat, was 7 days. 7 times the sun went up and down. So they came over and they inspect the boat. They look at all the refugees. They gave us food. They gave us drink. And I remember the moment they came because I was leaning against one of the step that going down to the hull of the ships. So I was just leaning against there, falling asleep or passed out or whatever. You're just not conscious. And somebody just popped my head up and poured something into my mouth. It was some milk. And truth matter is that I hated milk. I never drank it. But at that moment, it was something that just saved my life. It's something that kept me alive that moment. And I always remember. I don't know. I didn't remember. I do not remember who that soldier was, that sailor was. But all I remember is just put my head up and pour some milk into my mouth. Yeah.
Now, growing up in a war zone where there are no stable battle lines, did your parents sort of teach you how to survive?
We learned the art of survival very early on. Back when I was much younger, when I was possibly like 10, 11 years old, there was a huge conflict between Christians and Buddhists in South Vietnam. We're not even talking about communists at this point. We're talking about Christian and Buddhist on the same side. There was a lot of conflict, and the conflict became deadly at that point. And I remember I was maybe perhaps 10 or 11 years old. Might even be 10 years old. And my dad and my parents both said to me that when somebody asks you what church or what temple you go to, just say, I don't know. Just say my parents go to like the temple with the eyes on it. And I had no idea what the temple with the eye. Apparently, in South Vietnam, there was a religious group called the Cao Dai. It's that religious group. That temple has an eye on top of it. They follow both Buddha and Christ, so kind of like equal opportunity religion here. So it's a way that my parents explained to us is that by saying that the Christians or the Buddhists is not gonna attack you, because how can you attack somebody who's happen to follow both Buddha and Christ? So that is, to me, is a sort of lesson, like very early on, learn how to survive by blending in. And of course, during the war, it happened quite a few times. Every time that the mortar shell came to the city or attacked the area, we did not live in the city of Saigon. They said we live in the edge of the city. So mortar shell would frequently come launched into our area. So my parents would say that every time there's an attack, what you want to do is, would just go by the corner of the house, because the thinking is that when the house is hit by a mortar shell and the wall collapses, the corner will create a sort of a triangle pocket to save you. So the whole way of the house doesn't collapse on you, and that pocket of air or that pocket of triangle from the wall collapse will be the one that save you. So you learn little things like that, and you learn to stay out of trouble. One of the another example of learning to survive was something that actually I came pretty close to it. I was walking on my way to school one day. I was a little bit older then. I think I was maybe around 13 years old, or so, somewhere around that age. I was walking to school and I walked by a theater. It's the same, same route you took every morning at the time. I walked by the theater, and literally a few minutes after I walked by, there was a huge explosion. And I just turned around and ran back. Turned out to be the theater collapsed. The entire facade, the entire front of the theater collapsed. But there was a bomb that was planted there. The only person who got killed was the homeless man who slept in front of the theater, and I just saw like a few minutes before that. So I came back and looked at it. When I went home and told my father about that, he scolded me like so strongly that I ever seen. He said, "Don't you ever do that again," because he said the terrorists always set off 2 bombs. They always set up the first one to cause some damage and get people's attention, and then they set off the second one to kill all the people, trying to kill all the people who's gathering to watch it. And he said, "Don't you ever do that again, because if you hear an explosion, you get far away from it as possible." So these are things that 12, 13 years old, 9, 10 years old learn, as you grow up in a country at war. And it's become second nature of the way you grow up.
And during all this time, your father was fighting continually, constantly with the army. Is that right?
Yes, my father was actually, we rarely ever see him. I mean, he was fighting, he fought in battles in Pleiku, he fought in battles in Ban Mae Thuot, he fought in An Loc. You might have heard about the siege of An Loc, in which the city is a city in the sort of very close to the triangle area between Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Whoever control An Loc will control access to Cambodia, access to Laos, and access to Vietnam. And also, An Loc is the beginning of the highway heading to Saigon, the capital city. The city of An Loc was under siege for a long, long time. And so my father got a call, like, "You are coming in next." So what happened, my father was an artillery officer, and in artillery you need an officer at the front line who would measure enemy's positions, who calculate it, and they'll call back locations and give the precise location where mortar shell could come and hit. So my father his turn to come in, because the 2 previous artillery officer in An Loc has already been killed. So they brought my father was the next in line to come in. He described to me he survived. We didn't know at the time, because we didn't hear from him for several months. And turned out to be the third time is a charm. He's the third artillery officer that came in. He calculated position, called for air support, did all those things. They freed the cities after several months after he got in. And President Thieu, who was president of South Vietnam at the time, actually came to An Loc, gave him a Zippo lighter, and promoted him from captain to major right there in the city. And that was like one of his crowning moment as an artillery officer. And it was something that, I'm very proud of what he did. And it's something that, it's a story that we kept with us. My father has passed away. And it's one of those moments in which, that was very, he was very proud, and we were very proud of him for what he did.
Oh, absolutely.
To save the city. Yeah.
I understand at one point when the fighting would get close to where you were living, they'd close the schools.
Yes.
And then your parents would send you out to your grandfather. Is that right?
Well, actually, that was a Tet Offensive.
It was a Tet Offensive. Okay.
That was actually 1968. We live in this little area called Phu Nhuat at the edge of Saigon. And we live in one of these alleys. And across the street, from us is one of the gate to the headquarters of the South Vietnamese Armed Forces. During 1968, during the Tet Offensive, there's supposed to be a truce. But the Communist forces attacked every single city in South Vietnam, from Hue all the way down to, Cần Thơ. And there's a large group of North Vietnamese troops and Communist troops was surrounding and trying to attack Fort Trần Hưng Đạo, which is the headquarters of the armed forces. And right in the alley in front of our house, right there, they put this machine gun. And so 1968, we woke up, we heard all these things. First, we thought it was firecrackers. The intent in Vietnam, a firecracker is a way to celebrate the new year. So we had, and when we woke up, we said, "Wow, there's a lot of firecracker this morning." Well, they weren't firecrackers; they were gunshot back and forth. And as we peer out of the little window, and we saw there's Communist soldiers running back and forth, yelling, screaming, and there was a machine guns right there shooting across to the headquarters of the armed forces. So through these alleys, people, neighbors, was talking to each other, and we all stay in our house. And I guess a few houses down from us by the afternoon was burning. So we just kind of like decided, okay, we need to leave because the fire was coming, that's burned through the neighborhood, is about to come to our house. So we all decided, some relatives, in Vietnam, a lot of relatives live real close to each other, like literally right next door. So through back alley, we decided, let's all leave. And everybody all came out at the same time and walking through. 1968, I think I was 11 years old at the time. And I remember I'm just like hanging on to my mom's arm at one hand, and my mom was holding me in one hand with my hand in one hand, my sister in the other. And then my dad was carrying one of my younger brothers and hanging on to another one. We just kind of like walk like this. And I've never seen a communist soldier before. Up until then, I was 11 years old. We know about the war. We know my father was in the war. We know all the relatives in the war, but I myself never seen them. So I'm walking through, there was a gauntlet of communist soldier in the alley, was hiding in the alley with their machine guns. They were sitting in both sides like this. So as we're walking through, and I'm saying that if I'm making myself so small, they're not going to see me, and they're not going to shoot me, So I'm kind of like just reminded in my head that, and it's almost like your survival instinct kicked in, and you say to yourself, why I'm making myself invisible here? You can't see me. And so I'm just walking through this gauntlet, and we walked past it, and we went further and further and further away from the fighting. They didn't bother us for some reason at all, because they were busy attacking the armed forces across the headquarters across the street. So we just walked further and further away, and then we spent the first night in one of the courtyard of one of the abandoned house, like real far away from us. And then my parents finally figured out, okay, we can go to my grandfather who lived much further away from the fighting, that maybe we go spend time there. So we went to my grandfather's house. So 1968, I think I was out of school for about 3 months because the fighting went on, and the communist forces occupied different parts of the city for a long time. So I spent about 3 months away from school at my grandfather's house. And so my grandfather was fairly old by then, and he could not read the newspaper because the newspaper, the print was tiny. The newspaper, the biggest newspaper in Vietnam at the time, was a newspaper called Chính Luật. It has 4 pages. And the type was so small that, you have to have really good eyesight to read it. On top of that, virtually half of the newspaper has black ink was going through it, because apparently the censor, if they didn't like something, they just wipe it with black ink. So you have 4 pages of news, or so-called news, in tiny little print. My grandfather couldn't read it, so I say, "Hi, read it for me." So I was just sitting there reading the newspaper for him, reading word for word and everything. And then late at night, we would stay up and we listen to shortwave broadcasts from, Voice of America and the BBC, because we know that this is another way we can get some news that we couldn't get otherwise. So I stay up all night, until pretty late, until midnight or so. Because the signal is much clearer at night on shortwave broadcast. You can actually hear it. During the daytime, there's so much noise and interference, you couldn't hear it as well. So around 10 o'clock at night, we usually stay up and listen to these broadcasts. And that's how I got a lot of news when I was a kid. I think that's also when I realized that there was a power in information. I mean, you were 11 years old, but you realized this is information, this is a lifeline, this is how you get your news, and this is how you fight about the world. So I've learned a lot doing those.
So you're 11 years old. You're hearing Voice of America for the first time. You're realizing the potency and power of those broadcasts, and had no idea that one day you would work at Voice of America.
Isn't that something?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. One thing I think most Americans don't realize, that like the Civil War here in the United States, the Vietnam War split families. I mean, you would have siblings, you'd have uncles, aunts on different sides.
Absolutely. It's happening within my family. My mom has a brother, and so my grandfather migrated from North Vietnam into the South Vietnam, and then my mom's mom, which is my grandmother, died very young. She died shortly after giving birth to my mom in North Vietnam. And my grandmother had a sister. Her sister married this gentleman who much later we found out he's a minister of information for Ho Chi Minh. So he's in other words, he's a very high-ranking cabinet officer who's in charge of propaganda for North Vietnam. So that's my mom's aunt. When the war is over, when the communists took over the South, from North Vietnam took over South Vietnam, my family left on that boat that I mentioned earlier. My uncle, which is my mom's brother, actually chose to stay behind. He already sent over his children to this country. He chose to stay behind. We found out much later the reason why my uncle did this. He is somebody I always look up to. I mean, he was an officer in the South Vietnamese Army. He's also a writer and a poet, a very intelligent man, fluent in several languages. And we found out much later that he made a pact with several other South Vietnamese officers that if they lost the country, they will kill themselves. And so he took poison and killed himself when North Vietnam overran the South. So my uncle killed himself when we lost the war. My mom, as part of our family, left on a boat to the U.S. Her aunt, whose husband is a minister of information for Ho Chi Minh, flew from Hanoi to Saigon, went to look for her niece and nephew, and when he arrived at the house, he just found out that one just killed himself, another one has left for the U.S. That's how close it is for family.
Wow. Now, the naval vessel comes, visits you. They then escort you to Subic Bay, is that right?
Yeah.
And now, how did you get from Subic Bay to the States?
We were at Subic Bay for a few days, and then at the time there was a refugee assistance program, and the American government brought us from Subic Bay to Guam, and then flew us to a refugee camp in outside of near the area called Center Valley. There was they call Fort Indian Tau Gap. That's right. There was Fort Indian Tau Gap was a refugee. There used to be an old army barrack, and it became a refugee camp that brought people from South Vietnam and to resettle in this country. So we were brought there. They provide a lot of people help us. They provide English education. They provide all the assistance, and from there, my family was sponsored by a church, the Lutheran Church in Saratoga Springs, and they brought our family to Saratoga.
Did you know anything about Saratoga Springs?
We have no idea what Saratoga is. We had no idea what it is. We were just glad that somebody sponsored our family and brought us there. Kind of an interesting story that happened at the time was that when I first came to this country, when I was in the refugee camp, I didn't speak much. I didn't speak any English at all. If I tried to speak English, nobody understood what I was saying. And so I was studying English, and then the local colleges called Allentown College at the time, it's now called DeSales University, was conducting English classes. So I was taking English at the same time. I never graduated high school, but they sort of let me enter the university because I was taking freshman English and I seems to do okay, so they just let me in. And when I look back, it's sort of a mistake. I mean, I barely speak English. So
you were taking English at a university plus a couple of other courses, and you really couldn't speak English.
Right. And so I struggled mightily. So I stayed there for a year, but I realized that this is way beyond my head. I could not explain to the professor what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to do, and I did not understand any of the books I was reading, and I had a lot of difficulty, so I left after 1 year. I left Allentown College after 1 year, and I went to work in a factory, same factory that my dad worked in Saratoga. When they sponsor our family, my dad got a job with SB Manufacturing. It's a factory in Saratoga that's making parts and little parts and little things here and there. So he got a job there as a machinist. So he helped get me a job there in the factory to sweep the floor. So I worked there for about a year, and I realized that I need to do something with my life, if I want to go beyond just sweeping floor in the factory. And slowly I worked my way back to college. Yeah.
Now, when did the photography bug get you?
When I came back to college the second time, honestly, my English was still not very good. I didn't know much, and I'm still struggling a little bit. So I tried to study different things. And one of the things I studying was fine arts, paintings and drawings, sort of a visual, medium. It doesn't require much language skill. So I took some courses in that, and I sort of really liked it. And I took a photography course, like Photo 101, here's how you process and develop black and white film. And I really liked it. And I said, wow, this is such a good way to make images very quick. So I gravitated toward visual arts like that. So I started learning lithography, printmaking, painting, sculpture, all the arts. And I realized that I really enjoyed that. So I started taking more art courses. And that's when I took a photography course, and it just happened to launch a career afterward. Yeah.
Now, did you graduate from?
No, I did not.
But you found a job while you were taking these courses. Is that right?
Well, what happened was that my parents was not rich by any means. My father worked for a factory. My mom worked as a chambermaid. I barely had enough money to pay for college, and I couldn't even afford. And so I started working before I finished college. I still have some, quite a way to go. I started working. And because I took one photography course, so I sort of know how to process and develop film. So I bought a camera, real cheap camera, the cheapest camera I could get at the time, learning how to use it and taking some pictures. So I started getting a job. I worked, my first job, I actually had 3 jobs at the same time. I worked as a lab technician for the Troy Record. Troy, New York has a very small paper called The Record at the time. They're looking for a part-time lab tech, somebody who processed film from reporters and who make prints from the lab so they can print it in the newspaper. And I know how to do that, after 1 courses. and so I took the job. It was a job that worked Friday night and Saturday and Sunday. To just, you process, you mix chemistry, you sweep the floor, and you did all those things. So that was my first job. My second job was I worked part-time for a camera store to sell camera. Well, I bought a camera, so I know camera, so I'm going to be a camera salesman at the same time. What I was trying to do is I'm trying to put as many part-time jobs together, to make a living. So my third job, what happened at the same time when I was working for the Record is that when there's no photographers around, they said, "Hi, go take these pictures," right? So I just went out and took pictures. I took pictures at a fire. I took pictures something. I remember the very first time I went out and took pictures because there was a fire about a block away from the newspaper. And then they sent me out because there was no photographers around, and there was a reporter, a rookie reporter, was sent out along with me, and the 2 of us came out. And I said to her, "I've never been to a fire before." And she said, "Neither have I." So we look at each other and we say, "How do we cover this?" We just said, "I guess we're going to wing it." So I went there, and the first thing I saw is that the building was burning. And the fireman was trying to tell this old lady, "You got to leave, you got to leave." And she said, No, this is my house. I'm not leaving. So I'm just taking pictures of this fireman telling this old lady, "You need to leave." And there was a building burning behind. I didn't know that's what I'm supposed to take, but I said, "Well, it looked like an interesting photo." It was a front page photo. They trying to get this woman leaving. That building was burning. I've never covered a fire before. I was asking this rookie reporter, and she said, "I've never covered a fire before." You just do it. You just wing it. You just kind of like learn as you're on the job. And that's when I realized that's how you do it. You learn. You learn on the job. I didn't go to school for journalism. I didn't go to school to take pictures. I just kind of wing it as I'm going along. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And but I still remember that. It was one of the very first assignments.
Do you think your background, what you experienced in Vietnam and getting out of Vietnam, did it remove a lot of restraints? I mean, it's sort of like, I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to take every opportunity that comes this way. I'm going to take it.
I think it has sort of set a path for me. Is that I look at everything in front of me as an opportunity. When I look, there's a barrier in front of me. I look at, I need to climb over it. There's something that obstructs. I need to go around it. And I think that has been the way that I operate with a lot of things. Is I felt like there shouldn't be any barrier to what you want to do in life, because, when you look back, I mean, I'd already been left for dead in the South China Sea, without food and water for 7 days. You survive that, you can survive anything. I was in Vietnam when all these things went down. And if you survive those explosions, you survive the bullets and the fightings, you survive anything. So, I mean, everything else that come afterward, just like gravy to me at this point. And I think that sort of give me a perspective that there's nothing that should be a barrier in front of you.
This concludes the first half of our interview with Hai. For the rest of his remarkable and inspiring story, please listen to Episode 20.